Over the last few years, we have seen a number of disastrous launches of titles that woefully underdelivered on their promises. Many of these games' marketing campaign flat out lied to us by showing us footage that wasn't representative of the final product, or by straight up spouting exaggerations. Among the most infamous cases is of course No Man's Sky, a title that promised all kinds of things only to ultimately underdeliver at launch. There are plenty of videos out there highlighting all the lies that project lead Sean Murray said, things he said would be in the game that never panned out when the game released. One of the most notorious lies was Sean stating players would be able to see each other if they happened to meet on the same planet, which didn't take very long to disprove. So yeah, backlash against No Man's Sky was pretty severe, and while the game is in a much better place now, there is no denying that there was a lot of foul play involved with how the game was marketed, and how the team went radio silent after they were called out. No Man's Sky will go down in history for all the wrong reasons. Fast forward to today and we have two other titles that experienced a similar level of backlash. We have got 16 times the detail Fallout 76, which I've spoken at length about through a multitude of videos. This is yet another game that promised the moon, only to deliver a compromised, broken, incomplete product sold at full price. And then we have BioWare's Anthem, whose troubled development led to the launch of a very troubled product that lacked polish, content, or anything resembling a soul for that matter. This was further exacerbated by the revelation that the E3 2017 gameplay demonstration many were so captivated by turned out to be completely fake. Very little of the game had actually been built when that footage was shown, to the point where many BioWare staff members learned about the game's direction by watching that E3 2017 reveal. Now recently, Sean Murray decided to chime in with some thoughts about the launch of these two titles. The following information was conveyed by news outlet Games Radar, which transcribed a portion of a conference Sean attended called Develop, which took place in Brighton, UK. At one point, the topic of No Man's Sky, its rough launch, and its eventual recovery and comeback were brought up, with part of that process involving the development team going radio silent. Here's what Sean had to say on that front. We went about 2 years without talking to the press at all, and we went about 3 months without saying anything to the community either. That was really hard. I sat down so many times and wrote the perfect blog post that was going to explain everything about the game's development and the roadmap going ahead, but I could see that it didn't hold credibility with regards to where we were at. So basically, Sean didn't want to yap away and potentially make promises that he and the development team may not be able to fully fulfill, so he chose going silent and working on the updates instead. Sean then proceeded by addressing some of the other recent titles that have been met with similar backlash due to a rough launch. He said, quote, "There have been a number of games that have since come out, had a polarizing launch, and that explosive mix of loads of people playing it, but also problems. And I can see EA, Microsoft, or Bethesda try to placate players by just talking to them, but for right or wrong, it doesn't really work. You see this all the time when a big publisher will talk to the community and try to solve the problem and then get embroiled, taking up more and more of its headspace." So when he mentions EA, Microsoft, and Bethesda, he's no doubt referring to Anthem, Sea of Thieves, and Fallout 76 respectively. Now, on some level, I get where Sean is coming from. Oftentimes, these companies or developers might put out a statement, and an already pissed community might scrutinize what they're saying further, and that might generate more backlash. So to an extent, developers might think that it's best to just stay quiet until the storm blows over. But I, for one, don't agree with going this route. I don't agree with the idea of going radio silent. Don't get me wrong, after a rough launch, if a development studio needs more time to get things together, then it's certainly not wise to make promises or offer some kind of roadmap that may go unfulfilled. I mean, just look at what happened with Anthem. That game's roadmap crumbled like a house of cards, and all that's done is make people more skeptical and lose hope that recovery for this game is possible. But trying not to overpromise is one thing, and then going completely completely radio silent and cutting off all communication is another. If you ask me, the latter is definitely something you want to try to avoid doing, as all leaving a community in the dark does is give off the sense that a studio who screwed up the launch of a game has given up and no longer care, and that's just going to cause more of an exodus. This kind of radio silence will only keep festering skepticism. Now, Sean implied here that being communicative doesn't work, that it makes matters worse, but I'd argue that the only reason it seems that way is because developers and companies keep saying or doing the wrong things. The gaming community can smell bullshit a mile away, and a lot of what's been spouted by Bethesda and BioWare since their respective Disastrous launches absolutely reeked. They can never flat out say, we fucked up, here's what happened, here's what we're going to do to make it up to you. They can never speak to their communities openly and honestly and genuinely. It's always some flimsy excuse followed by some flimsy attempt at recompense. I mean, just look at the way Bethesda handled Fallout 76's canvas bag fiasco. Instead of saying, we messed up, we're going to take care of this right away, they kept trying to skirt around the issue by first making the excuse that there was a lack of material, a shortage of canvas apparently, which is ridiculous, and then by trying to offer a measly 500 atoms as recompense. It wasn't until backlash got too much that they finally said, okay, we'll make some canvas bags for people who sign up and submit tickets. More recently, Todd Howard tried to come off as sympathetic to people who are peeved about Fallout 76's rough launch in an interview with IGN. On one hand, he did say that much of the criticism was well-deserved, but on the other hand, he said that he not only knew the launch of Fallout 76 would be rough, and that Bethesda decided to release Fallout 76 in a compromised state anyway, he also spouted nonsense about how it's not how you launch a game, it's what it becomes. He basically said it's not important to launch a fully fleshed out, polished game because we can fix it later down the line eventually, which is just an awful attitude. This mentality is why the AAA landscape is the way it is right now. It's why it's so hard to trust AAA video game launches these days. People don't pay for a game so they can have a good experience a year down the line. People buy these games for a solid product the second they get their hands on it. More recently, Bethesda justified the recent inclusion of gameplay affecting microtransactions in Fallout 76, and in turn breaking the promise that monetization in this game would be cosmetic only by brushing the issue off by simply saying that it's a convenience thing rather than strictly pay to win, which is of course an all-around shitty excuse. Don't even get me started with Anthem and all the bullshit that's been said by BioWare and EA alike. Remember when Andrew Wilson recently told website Game Daily in an interview that the reason Anthem had such a rough launch was because of player expectations and different categories of players, instead of highlighting the game's lack of polish, lack of content, lack of compelling loot, lackluster endgame, lackluster story, troubled development, so on and so forth. Remember when BioWare lead producer Ben Irving addressed the lies from Anthem's deceitful marketing campaign by stating that this was the cost of transparency? Remember the defensive and cowardly response Casey Hudson provided when Anthem's troubled development and mismanagement was exposed by Kotaku? Instead of providing his side of the story and taking responsibility, Casey admonished the expose for doing what it did. There's also things like how despite the Anthem community continuously telling BioWare that they need to turn up that loot hose, which happened twice by accident before BioWare patched that fun bug out very quickly, BioWare continued to ignore this universal feedback. And how about BioWare's Ben Irving having promised that Anthem wouldn't be dead on arrival and that they would keep it up with communication, only for BioWare to go radio silent for weeks on end after the going got tough? These are just a few examples from both of these games. If you go through my history of videos on Anthem and Fallout 76, there are so many other things that developers and publishers of these respective titles have said that left me scratching my head. I could sit here for a while longer talking about all the communication mishaps from both BioWare and Bethesda, but I think you get the idea. So yeah, it really isn't a matter of attempting communication not working. It's just that companies tend to do a very crappy job at communicating. There's a general lack of openness, honesty, explanation, apology, and accountability. They offer these really ass-backwards perspectives and justifications. They tend to be very selective with which questions they answer, ignoring the most pressing ones. A lot of the higher-ups who steered these ships into icebergs go into hiding or offer non-responses, and it all fosters an environment where more fuel gets added to the fire. Don't get me wrong, I think Sean is on some level right in saying that actions speak louder than words. I get that the number one priority should be to hunker down and work on the content and deliver on that content, but at the same time it is entirely possible to communicate and provide assurances and be open while working on the next big update, and saying the right words to a disillusioned community goes a long way, and that's where game developers and publishers often struggle for some reason. They can't muster up the courage to just be straight with us, to just say we fucked up, we're sorry, to do everything in their power to take immediate action in order to make up for the fact that they made people spend their hard-earned money on a product that was clearly not ready for launch or that's so far away from what was advertised. I believe there is a way to make communication amidst a rough situation work for developers. I don't feel like silence is ever the answer, but people have to feel like developers mean what they say and that what they say actually makes sense, that what they're saying is coming from a good place, that it's not them just making up bullshit excuses. But unfortunately, it seldom feels that way these days with AAA games and all their corporate PR speak and all their communication filters. So yeah, that's sort of my general take on what Sean Murray had to say about how talking to the community supposedly doesn't work when you're in a rough place. I think that's pretty bad advice. Just speak to your community with integrity. Show that you actually mean what you're saying through your actions. Do that consistently and you might find that attitudes can change for the better. People are actually very open to the idea of game companies redeeming themselves. It's just these companies are making that harder and harder for themselves by the things they say and the things they do. That's just what I think though. Let us know in the comments below what you think about Sean Murray's latest statement, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.